Dreamland R Final Mix was a game that was made using Enterbrain's RPG Maker 2000. Released in German in 2005 by Judau, the game as of 2012 has received an English translation, courtesy of Photech 97. The game takes place from the perspective of 4 characters, Brad, Renoa, Seth and Carter, as they explore a mysterious town and its surroundings. What lies in wait for them, and how will they cope? Find out in today's Infinite Backlog Review. God damn it, not again. Dreamland R Final Mix plays very much like a lot of the old RPGs from the 16-bit Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis era through to the likes of the PlayStation. The game is presented from a top-down perspective, and your characters are guided around using your arrow keys. An interesting addition to the game is the inclusion of equipping weapons and using them on the field. The game adapts more of an action RPG approach by having your characters be able to shoot and slash at the enemies that hinder your progress. The game seems to also be heavily inspired by other survival horror games such as Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Another game it can also share some similarities with is Corpse Party, which was another game which started off as an RPG Maker game. Now introductions are out of the way, let's kick things off with the good. I liked the game's use of stereo sound. It's cleverly used to indicate which direction sounds are coming from, which really adds to the horror elements this game has to offer. For a 2D RPG like this, where horror can only be depicted to a limited degree, good use of sound and music needs to be cleverly implemented in order to build up the setting and tension of the game, which I feel this game has done quite well in regards to sound. Unfortunately, I don't understand German, so the contents of the ominous voices heard throughout the game would most likely fly over my head. Difficulty levels were a nice addition. The characters have levels, which dictates the amount of health they have as well as how many items you begin with. The easy difficulty gives you a stack of healing items and a level 50 character with a lot of health, whereas the hardest difficulty gives players a limited amount of health and starts them off with no healing items at all. From my understanding, the English translated version was the only version to implement difficulty levels. The original German game was set to hard by default, so the English version of the game can cater to people who just want to play for the story, as well as people who want to experience the game at its original intended difficulty or higher. Game length I thought was pretty fair. I was able to finish the game in just under 6 hours, so it's clear to see that for an RPG Maker game, a lot of work and effort has been put into it. The reason as to why the characters are in the mysterious town and its surroundings become pretty apparent later on, and not to spoil anything, I thought it was quite a fitting reason, and the ending was fairly straightforward to understand, albeit a little cliched. Use of locations I thought was also fairly well done. It keeps the game fresh, as well as sets up the uneasy feeling that nobody is safe and anything can happen. But one thing it couldn't set up for is the bad. Choice of music was, well, to put it politely, unique. Throughout the game, your playable characters engage in several boss fights, and to be honest, the choice of music seems really bizarre and doesn't quite fit the scene. It also doesn't help that the boss music doesn't loop correctly, which just feels off and really annoying to me. Now, remember how I talked about the action RPG elements of the game? Well, I find them to be a bit clunky. So as opposed to having random battles and turn-based battles in similar looking RPGs, all of your enemies that you have to fight happen in real time, so you use your knife and your gun to kill basically anything out there that wants to kill you. Now, doesn't it seem like a coincidence that all of your characters just happen to carry a knife and a gun, with the exception of Brad who picks one up later? Just food for thought. Level design can be a little frustrating. A notable area would have to be the hotel. At some stage, you feel that you think you've explored the whole hotel, there's nowhere else you need to go, but you're stuck. You don't know where to go next. Well, it turns out that there's a side room that you can enter in order to get a key so that you can progress. Now that sounds simple enough, but the location of that side room is in a place where other hotel rooms which have entranceways to side rooms won't allow you to enter anything. Now this brings up the assumption that if you can't enter the side room in one hotel room, what makes you think that there are side rooms in other rooms that share its design? Thus, you spend more time retracing your steps in the hotel thinking that you've missed something. Well, yes, you have missed something. It's sitting in a side room. And once you discover that side room, you'll probably be hitting your head against the nearest wall. Some of the sequences and puzzles in the game were also quite frustrating, a notable one being a scene where Renai is trying to escape a small army of skeletons by breaking into a cabin and using the trapdoor there. Now the cool thing was the fact that the location of the key to get into the cabin changes every time you reload the scene. The bad part is what happens once you get into the cabin. You have the options to repel the skeletons by activating flame barriers using conveniently placed switches, but you also need to find a key to go down the trapdoor before you get overwhelmed by skeletons, and you have a whole bunch of keys to choose from. There's no indicator telling you which of the keys to pick, and by the time you've picked 2 or 3 of them, the skeletons would simply walk over the now harmless barriers and kill you because you've been neglecting to press the switches. A few of the puzzles have really annoyed me as well. In one of them, you're playing as Seraph and it requires you to push a block onto a particular space. Again, sounds easy enough, right? But as you're pushing the block, you'll discover that the walls are invisible, and you may need to exit the room and re-enter it so that the block's position resets and you can try again. Another puzzle that annoyed me was the one where Seraph has to build a larger picture by pushing tiles onto a larger square. Now, if you cock it up, the only way you can fix the problem is to leave the room and come back in. Now this gets really annoying, especially if you've only got 2 more pieces to go and you accidentally move one into the wrong space. It just means that you have to rebuild that puzzle all the way from the beginning again. If you thought those 2 were bad, get a load of this one. You'll need to know the combination to open the door on train later on in the game. 3-digit combination. The only clue that you have is a blood stain on the ground that spells the word Isles. Now you'll notice that the letters I, S and S are highlighted, and they also conveniently look like a 1 and 2 5s. So naturally you'd go back to the door and enter the code as 155 just to find it doesn't work. You try other combinations such as 551 and 515 with no luck. Now, what if I told you that the solution to that puzzle was the combination 037? So it makes you wonder, how the hell did you come to that conclusion? And then you realise, oh, I'm supposed to use the numbers that aren't highlighted. So then you can go off and proceed to kill some more brain cells. So if you're planning to play this game and you're stuck on this puzzle, I've saved you some time trying to figure this out. With that, we move on to The Ugly, where I discuss graphics. Now it's pretty obvious from the start of this review that you'd be thinking, now wait a minute, doesn't Brad look like Chrono from Chrono Trigger? Renai sort of looks like Marl, and I'm pretty sure one of those bosses look like Robo. Well, you'd be right, they're all sprite edits, but not just from Chrono Trigger. You'll find some sprites from Tales of Phantasia, Lufia 2, Terranigma and Breath of Fire to name a few. So props to Judau for crediting and acknowledging the edits, as well as the sources for some of the music and sounds in the game. Although the different sprite styles may look inconsistent and tend to clash with one another, it doesn't really matter too much to me. Another thing to note was a particular scene in the game really surprised me. Using sprites, Judau was able to present a small scene in a first-person perspective, which I found really well done and certainly shows the lengths in which Judau is willing to try new things and the ambition shown in the making of this game. And as I mentioned earlier in The Good, it's clear to see that even with sprite editing, having done it myself in the past, there's been a lot of work, a lot of care and effort put into this game, and I can certainly appreciate it. So with that, I'll close off with a final thought. Despite everything I've said in the bad, I did have a bit of fun with this game. The translation effort was quite well done, going to the efforts of translating the text which appeared outside of the text box as well, so great work on that. Overall, the game was great at filling in an afternoon for me. A little rough around the edges with some parts leaving a lot of unanswered questions, but to be fair, I also believe that this game is part of a series and that another game appears to be in the works. From what I've seen of it, it looks a lot tidier and a lot more polished, but from Judau's blog, There's been no word since the 1st of January 2013, so here's hoping it's still going. Perhaps a lot of the unanswered questions might have come from the fact that I may need to play another game to fully understand what's going on. If anyone can help clear that up, feel free to leave a comment on this video and I can look into it. If you want to play the game, I have left a link in the video description below, courtesy of Project Aria, whose stream of this game introduced me to it and gave me the idea to review it. So thank you very much for that. A link to her Twitch channel can also be found in the video description below as well. So in the end, I'll give Dreamland R Final Mix a... let's see. It gets a Carter out of Seth. It's a little short, but it certainly has tall ambition and potential to possibly become better. With that, we've reached the end of Dreamland R Final Mix. Stay tuned for the next Infinite Backlog review.